Okay, algebra 10-4A radical equations now. And this should be a pretty short and sweet section here on solving radical equations. So now, that's what we're going to do today. And what is a radical equation? It's any equation that contains a radical. So it's going to be just like old school equations, solving them, except we have to deal with this radical now. So a simple example would be like this square root of x plus 6 equals 22. So it's an equation. You've got your radical of square root of x. Because of that, that makes it a radical equation. Okay? So what we do here is, just like in other equations, we're going to isolate the radical expression. Okay? So to do that, I'm going to get rid of everything else that's on that side. So I would subtract 6 from both sides, and that would simply give me the square root of x equals whatever 22 minus 6 is, which happens to be 16. Okay? The next step is to square both sides of the equation, and you might need to use FOIL here. We'll talk about that in the future in examples there. But in this case, remember when we did other works with quadratics, to get rid of the square root, we would square both sides. So we would just simply square this and square this here. And then we're going to solve the equation, whatever's left over. And you might need to factor if that's the case, or use the quadratic equation if that's the case. But in this one, it doesn't work out that way. We know that the square and square root undo each other, so you're left with x. And over here, 16 squared equals 256, and then we're done. So that was an easy one. Let's take a look at some other examples and see how they do. Oh, and just so this shouldn't say equation, this should say formula. Because there might be cases where you have to factor to get your final answer from the equation, or use the quadratic formula. Okay? All right, so let's do some practice. Let's look over at letter B here. Okay, so looking at this one, we've got our radical of 2x minus 6, but we got a couple things happening there. You've got a 3 being multiplied here, and you also have this 8 being added here. So we got to get rid of a couple things. So what should we do first? Well, let's subtract that 8 first. Remember, we want to always subtract first before multiplication or division when we're solving equations. So we're going to do that. So then we're going to be left with 3 times 2x minus 6 under the radical. These are gone, and it's be equal to whatever 14 minus 8 is, which is 6. Okay? So we're still in the business of the first step of isolating that radical. So we still have to get rid of this 3 here. So to do that, we're going to divide by 3. And so we take this whole thing and divide it by 3, and we also have to do that to the other side, just like solving regular equations. So on the left side, these 3's are going to cancel out, and you're going to be left with simply the square root of 2x minus 6. And on this side, 6 divided by 3 is equal to 2. Okay, so we've isolated the radical. That was step 1. Step 2 is to square both sides, because we've got to get rid of this radical. So we're going to square both sides. And we should know now that that the squaring a square root undoes each other. So you're left with 2x minus 6 equals 2 squared, which is 4. So now we have an equation left over, and we just have to solve that one. So what I would do is I would add 6 to both sides. So I'd have 2x equal to 10. And then we know we divide both sides by 2. So x would equal 5.
Anthony Mandel, please.
So when we look back at this problem, again, we had to isolate. So we had to subtract 8 first from each side. Then we divided by 3 on each side. And then we had our radical isolated. Then we squared each side at this step here to get rid of the radical. And then we had just a regular equation, 2x minus 6, and solved for it to get x equals 5. So it might be harder than that. It might take more than one step. You might have to use the quadratic formula or the factoring if that's the case. Okay, so let's do another example and see what happens here. Okay, so the first thing here is that the square root of x squared minus 3 equals x plus 2. So we're all ready to go. We've already had it isolated. There's nothing else on the left side of the equation but the radical. So we're already ready to go in squaring. So we can square this, and we have to square this side. But we are going to use parentheses because here's what we talked about in step 2, that we might need to use FOIL. Okay, so over on the left side, we've got square root of a square, so we're going to cancel that out. We'll have x squared minus 3. On the right side, we're going to use parentheses here around that x plus 2. And then I kind of do this as a little bit of side work over on the side here because I don't want to put this all in the middle of my problem, but we have to FOIL this x plus 2 plus x plus 2 squared. So when we do that, we know by now that we're going to go x times x is x squared, 2x plus another 2x plus 4. Okay, so we know how to do that. And then we can combine our middle term into x squared plus 4x plus 4. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm going to take as that answer. Just move this over a little bit. Let's see here. Nope, what is that doing? Okay, I think we're good. So we're going to take this answer here from factoring it and move it to this side here. So x squared plus 4x plus 4. Okay, next. I have to do some working around. Now I don't have the radical, but I can try to get these x squared. Now I've got to get everything on one side. Because notice you kind of have a quadratic here. So you've got to kind of get everything on one side equal to 0. But notice when you do that, if you subtract an x squared from each side, what's going to happen to those x squareds? They're going to cancel out. They're going to cancel out here, so it worked out very nice for us. Now we just have negative 3 on the left, and we have a 4x plus 4 on the right. So in that case, the x squareds canceled out. But if they didn't cancel out, that's where you'll have to use factoring or the quadratic formula to solve if you end up with an x squared here. Here they canceled out, so we just have a regular two-step equation. So we're going to go ahead and subtract 4 first. I know you could do this a different way or flip the equation around, but that gives us a minus 7. These cancel, equals 4x. And then I'm going to divide by 4. And remember, it's okay to have fractions in your answer. So in this case, we'd have x equals negative 7 over 4, or if you decimal people, negative 1.75. Either way, that would be the correct answer. Okay, so that does it. Other than using, factoring or quadratics, you might see a problem like that tomorrow. So here's your lesson summary. Write an example of a radical equation. Just pick your own. You just can't pick one we already had. Don't copy and pick one that was from the notes. And then solve this one here. 2 times the square root of x minus 1 equals 49. And looking at that, I can see 2 things you have to do to isolate that radical before solving. Okay, that's it. Short and sweet, like I said. And have a nice day. We'll see you next time.